and welcome to the vlog, More to Space and Air with IMD Ade Fejide Omole. Today I have with me Dr. Marlene Losier, who is a legal expert in international law. She advises private and public clients on international and national laws relating to culture and space policies affected by maritime, terrestrial, and beyond Earth considerations, often resulting from the succession of states in the post-colonial contexts. She advises on the United Nations Treaty system and its auspices, counsels on bilateral and multilateral agreements, and assists in developing corresponding domestic rules. Dr. Losier is an expert in complex matters of sovereign immunity and jurisdiction where they conflict, when they are invoked in areas beyond national jurisdiction, and specifically in respect to issues relating to title and proprietary rights, including with regard to the moral and ethical arguments concerning the rights of communities of origin and private individuals. Our academic background is in government and social anthropology, and our legal basis is in international litigation, alternative dispute resolution, and contractual matters. She is the principal of Losier and Gonzalez, a PLLC based in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for coming on the vlog today, Dr. Losier.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Awesome. So we'll get right to it. Can you please introduce yourself and lead us through your career in space and any other interesting thing you might want to share at this time? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so as you said, my name is Dr. Marlene Michelle Losier. I am a legal expert in international law. Just to give you at first the context of my educational training, I studied social anthropology and government at Harvard, and I went on to study law. I practiced law, so international arbitration, litigation, and then complex corporate matters for a large international law firm for many years in Washington and in Houston. So I worked with mostly petroleum companies, some satellites, high net wealth individuals, but all of these cases involved multinational disputes, jurisdictional disputes. I enjoyed learning all of the legal tools, the legal understanding of the law, and from excellent attorneys. It just wasn't something I felt so much passion for. So I was very, very fortunate to be invited by a professor at the University Institute in European University Institute outside Florence in Italy. I was invited to do a master's in international law, where I looked at auction rights over rare objects, cultural objects, and conflicts with the World Trade Organization clauses. And then I was invited to stay and continue with the PhD in public international law. And I looked at title and proprietary rights over the cargo of sunken colonial vessels outside areas of national jurisdiction. And I really loved it. So that was my educational career, which it ultimately really did, was a great mix. So originally I'm from Mexico and from Haiti. So my mother's from Mexico, my father's from Haiti. I was born in Mexico and I was studied in the United States and then Europe. So the idea of always that I had of understanding the conflict between cultures, the good that comes from it, and also the difficulties, particularly then issues of where objects moving from one country to another country. So we often hear about artifacts and museum pieces, auction pieces, this idea of where they belong and what the laws are, the arguments to get them there, the lack of arguments. So I was really passionate about that, and I felt ecstatic to be able to work in that area, which I do. So I work for states and predominantly in the United Nations organization to help advise them on how to return and restitute those objects, whether if they're from under the water, on land, in museums, auction houses, from private collectors. But the issue there was I'm always working with jurisdiction and sovereignty. So issues of the state, laws, international laws, and as you may all know, sometimes they're the law, but they don't seem quite right. They're ethical issues that make that structure more complicated, especially when you have legal structures, international legal structures that are superimposed over areas or former colonial areas, where people from those areas need to learn to speak the language in which those laws are conducted, predominantly go to those jurisdictions where those laws are then employed, and make arguments for objects that come from their countries of origin, which is a very difficult task. But this issue of jurisdiction and cultural heritage, it's come together before in this, for the water. So in the 1982 Law of the Seas Convention and the 2001 UNESCO Convention. But for about a year, many years ago, I followed an organization co-founded by a woman named Michelle Hanlon to identify and safeguard cultural heritage beyond Earth. So it seemed very interesting. I followed very closely for about a year and could see that a lot of the issues that I work with beyond national jurisdiction, conflicting jurisdiction, notions of origin, were central to that. So I started working with her, and that's how my interest in space developed, in the cultural heritage aspect for sure, but becoming more involved in space. There were a lot of issues with the law and with ethics that replicate the type of law and issues that I work with on Earth. And those are, again, issues that have to deal with the pre-colonial structure and the effects of that structure, state succession, and the type of legal issues that many states are still working with. And in this respect, with regard to space, a lot of emerging state actors, which is what I call them, states that are emerging. But these states often have a very rich history of understanding space, the cosmos, the culture, or through time, has really focused around the understanding and the study of space. So it's really developing legal standing also for these states that are not yet or are becoming spacefaring, in order to help them really come to be part of the space ecosystem, both at the international level, so intergovernmental level, and the private international level, because ultimately the benefits of space are imperative for all countries, even in their terrestrial application.
Wow, the last part was so succinct. The benefits of space is truly, for all mankind, essentially. I wanted to follow up on your recent visit to the Legal Subcommittee of the UNCOPOUS. Could you speak more about that and what your role was at the just concluded Legal Subcommittee of the UNCOPOUS?
Okay. Yes. So, yes, I was at the Legal Subcommittee for the United Nations COPUS. So the committee on the peaceful uses of outer space. And so this committee is under UNOSA, which is the United Nations Office for space, and the COPOUS has three main parts: one general part and the legal subcommittee, and its scientific and technical subcommittee. So the COPOUS was established as part of the United Nations in order to really look to the future at that time, starting the 1969 Outer Space Treaty, but how space affairs would be conducted. And I would say it was really spurred by the activity of the former Soviet Union and the United States initially, and there were 5 conventions that were eventually concluded, and there are a series of principles which you can easily find on the internet and read through to become more acquainted. But so the COPOUS is the predominant organ in the United Nations dealing with space, developing the laws, dealing with the issues around space. And since its inception, there are other groups also within the UN system that deal with more specialized areas. For example, the International Telecommunications Union that deals more with frequency and satellites and so on. But within the COPOUS, that's where all the member states, so states who have signed these treaties, come. The UNCOPOUS is based in Vienna. The UN headquarters is based in New York. The cultural headquarters is based in Paris, but the space headquarters is based in Vienna, where these delegates come about 3 times a year for the 2 subcommittee meetings and the general committee. They're usually state delegates that come, so this is part of the state delegation. The Foreign Ministry of State usually sends their delegation, and there could be some variance within each state. There are limited numbers of people that can be on the delegation, so having worked in other UN agencies for COPOUS and even at the headquarters, depending on the subject, the delegation is usually composed of maybe the ambassador, if it's a legal secretary, a legal expert, scientific experts. It really depends. So the delegation, for a good delegation, you need to have a multidisciplinary team that's able to advise in real time at the matters that are raised. So it could, I would say, between 1 and 4 or 5. But in order to go to those delegations, you usually have to be part of this of the function of the state. But in my case, as a legal expert, I have been asked to go for some states or organizations to advise them. So I'm not part of the state per se. I could be a citizen of the state, but usually I go as a legal expert. So they need or they ask for my advice on the issues, legal advice issues that are raised. So I follow the meetings, I advise on the particular subjects. So I prepare beforehand, review the materials, I give my expert opinion, and while we're there, I follow and also advise. And so that's part of being a part of a good legal delegation. So I serve as the legal expert. So I've been attending the legal the COPOUS for many years, and other as I mentioned, other UN organizational structures, but the takeaway for me from this particular legal subcommittee was that it was well attended. There was as you know, unfortunately, because of the pandemic, much had been virtual, which was advantageous, I would say, in many respects, particularly for states that it is harder to travel to Vienna. States that perhaps are just interested, they could participate virtually. The audience was greater. People who were interested and not part of the delegation were able to participate because of the new development of the UN channel. So people are able to follow what were closed UN meetings on the UN channel. So this increased the audience, which I think is a very good thing. but you lost a lot of the interpersonal dialogue. It's different when it's not in person. So this COPUS was mostly in person. There were fewer virtual interventions. However, it's still important to be able to have that opportunity, I feel. And there were a lot of issues to be discussed. There's a working group on space resources that's working very effectively. But there are many other pressing issues revolving around space that need to be addressed. Unfortunately, there's a lot of work, and all of it cannot be done at once. And there's a slowness to it because the work is done by consensus. So I think the meetings were very productive. A lot of the states did address issues of concern for them. Some related more to the interest of private entities that were ready to go beyond space, even some states that were ready to go beyond perhaps what was originally envisioned in the Outer Space Treaty. So the rules in order to do that are not very clear. And so to move forward, there's somewhat of a limitation if the rules are not clear. So as you know, there is a new development with the Artemis Accords, the 23 state parties that have signed the Artemis Accords, that is based off of the Outer Space Treaty using its principles, and that has other provisions that allow a group of states to move forward in the space exploration process. So that can be very helpful for many, but the concern is if the use of these series of bilateral agreements cause a new custom in space operations, that then poses somewhat of a challenge to the conventional law, because customary law can eventually trump the conventional law. So that was of concern for some, but not all. There are issues too of many new state delegations, which was a good thing. And there's a need for those states to learn more about the space treaties and the principles, as well as develop national policies for themselves in order to benefit from space and partake in the international conversations. So at UNOSA, the UN Office of Outer Space Affairs, they have an excellent team ready to help nation states develop domestic laws, and to also help give them a better understanding of the function of the treaties, which I think is exceptional because it can open the dialogue to a greater number of states. So that was also big takeaway, that office is working very effectively. States seem very interested in taking advantage of that service. There are also growing numbers of permanent observers at the COPUS. So there are state members who attend the COPUS and who are able to participate in the conversation. Then through the ECOSOC, another branch of the United Nations, it's an accreditation system for non-governmental organizations. Once you have that accreditation or involved in accreditation, you can ask for observer status and potentially permanent observer status at the COPUS. So you can be, for example, group of IISL, International Institute of Space Law, Space Generation Council, for Moonkind, Safe and Quieter Skies. There are a lot of organizations that do very good work in space outside of the UN system that are now part of the COPUS as a permanent observer status. So that's another opportunity to be able to attend if that's of interest, is through the permanent observers. And they played a greater role in participating in the discussions, which is important because, one group can't do everything, including the United Nations. So there has been a call by the President of the General Assembly to have NGOs help implement the existing 17 space sustainable development development goals to help identify issues that the UN may not be aware of, and many times it is these volunteer groups, NGO groups that do identify and help, and to help provide practical and generally applicable solutions. So the growing number of permanent observers at COPOUS, I feel, is doing an excellent job. However, there is some tension amongst the states of how much the permanent observers should participate. So there are some states in favor of having them have a lesser voice, which does create some tension. Also, interestingly enough, at the COPOUS and the previous sessions, there was a lot of controversy, I would say, over the situation in Ukraine at the moment, and we saw that play out in the discussions of the COPOUS.
Fantastic. I would follow up with that by asking your view on the importance of expanding international cooperation in the peaceful uses of outer space.
Yes, that's essential to expand cooperation in the peaceful uses of outer space. So one of the fundamental principles of space law is the peaceful uses of outer space, and the ideas of due regard, which really set the stage for the notion that space belongs to everyone. We should use it and benefit from it in non-conflicting ways. And because the principles in the Outer Space Treaty were developed in the 1960s, 1970s, going forward, the idea of peace was very important coming out of world wars. In the Cold War, decolonization, periods before decolonization. So for humanity, we were in a very conflictive state. So it was very important to at least maintain space for peaceful use, and also to prevent the colonization of space, for lack of a better word. This idea of it belongs to me and I will use it for its resources, which, as you're familiar with, has had a long and impactful history on Earth. Interestingly enough, this past week, the Vatican announced that the papal decrees allowing for colonization were wrong, and which I think is going to play a significant role in this notion of being able to access and claim title rights over areas, which already is prohibited in the Outer Space Treaty. But I think it will influence the context, not just the word on paper. But in any case, for greater collaboration, in my view, the United Nations is essential. It's essential because it was established by the UN Charter that envisioned all states, all people to work collaboratively. And it was established at a time where there were still many colonized areas, but it helped move through that decolonization, a period of decolonization, which was not easy. Many states are still in that process. The ICJ, the International Court of Justice, in one of its 2019 cases, say that the decolonization process was not yet over. It is a process that is continuous, and that is key, I think, to understanding the role of emerging state actors, because we should identify who are the state actors that are much involved in space, where are the private state actors, and who are the others that are just learning of or needing to become. And in my research, it becomes very clear to me how the structure has generally been established and what needs to be done outside of just general roles within the UN, or the COPOUS. So the COPOUS, the UN has a treaty, a system of treaties, UN treaties, which are essential in order to help collaboration. They set the rules. Many countries, either they're very fluent with them or they're learning them, but it is essential to maintain them because that will, I think, creates somewhat of a fair playing ground. And we have to be patient so that everyone is fluid in those treaty rules as a forum to participate multilaterally as a system of states viewed equally. So that is the forum. Now, because space is evolving so quickly, we move from old space to new space, where there are new space actors other than just state actors. There's so much happening. We have private actors, we have organizations that are taking roles that we would typically attribute to the United Nations, but because of the immensity of the work, it's also incredible what humanity is capable of and in working together. So working with non-governmental organizations also, I think, is a big opportunity for individuals to participate in space legislation, space activities. So you have organizations, for example, the International Astronautical Federation, that is an impressive organization that also it's based on a group of private organizations, I would say, that are member to the Federation. And there's a lot of discussion on very interesting space issues. And I think that also creates a lot of collaboration. Then you have states that are very successful in their spacefaring capacity, that are doing excellent capacity building, that are really extending themselves to help other states learn about the roles that they can play in space exploration and how space can benefit them. So, for example, the Japanese, the state of Japan is doing an excellent job. JAXA, the Japanese Space Agency, has contributed many resources to the UN to help countries in the process of becoming more state-faring. So that capacity building within states is excellent. Also, the sharing of experts at different universities working together. Also, their mentorship programs for younger individuals who'd like to become more active in space, and whether it's through the UN, through the IAF, through many organizations, there are opportunities, because there really are so much, there's so much to do in space, and there's so many ways that as humans we can benefit from space, whether it's, health, education, as we saw through the pandemic, records, finances. There's just so much that space can do through the web of satellite systems. And I'm not a technical expert, but we really do need to take advantage of that. And so in order to do that, we need to learn. There are programs that there's sponsorship for students from states not yet spacefaring to go to states that are space. But I wouldn't say, someone listening to the podcast may think, so I don't have access to my state delegation. I don't have access to an airplane to go here, to go there. If you have access to the internet, I would encourage you to do a Google search for space organizations. And I know this isn't ideal for many people, because everyone, of course, should be paid, for their work. But there's a lot of volunteer opportunities for one to participate, even if virtually, and one can learn significantly. So you could almost think of it as an extension of the learning process. Maybe not go to university per se, but learn through participation in these organizations, create a network, and then the opportunities will come. And there is a growing interest to have individuals from states not yet spacefaring to become active. For example, at the IAF. I was just in Paris at their spring meetings, and there's a new group called Access that looks to the five regions of the world in order to help those regions of the world become more spacefaring. So they have opportunities for volunteer positions. Many other groups. If you Google them, you can find them. I'm happy to share. But that's one way of becoming more knowledgeable and more participant, because there are opportunities, and there is a need for it in my own personal career path. When I graduated from university, my mother asked me, so did you learn a lot? Was it good? And I didn't really do anything. I said I didn't really feel that I came out with, a particular skill. But I said the only thing I felt that I learned is how to learn. And she said, well, that's the best thing you could have learned. I mean, that's the only thing that really matters. And I do feel that has been quintessential for me, because I have developed my own learning path. And that has been a great opportunity for me, because I'm able to focus in on the areas and specialize in areas that I enjoy. I enjoy working with people. They appreciate the work that I do, and that can make a great contribution. So the internet, of course, is a great resource. I would encourage anyone to reach out to me or someone else that you see doing the type of work that you like, to ask them, if they would be willing to speak, or to at least suggest where they could become more involved. But it's not as big and inaccessible as many other things in life, I would say. Space is more accessible, and if you have the internet, you can access it, I think.
Thank you so much for that. You touched on essentially every other thing that I wanted to ask you on volunteering, on internship. At this stage, I'm just going to ask you for your concluding remarks. And if you could also tell us how people can connect with you, maybe on LinkedIn, that would be great.
Yes, I'm happy to comment there. And also just to mention, one of the observations that I had at Legal Subcommittee is, I would say a great majority of the delegates were very young. So, that did surprise me. They were very, very young. I would say, young professionals. So there's a growing interest there, and a growing place for young professionals. So concluding remarks. Yes, anyone can access me on LinkedIn. So if you just put my name in, I'm there. I often post on issues that I feel could have a pivotal effect on the development of the law. So I don't just post about anything. The issues I post about could show where the law can potentially be changed. And there's also a large resource of contacts on LinkedIn. So I think it's a great tool, because you can find one contact, then make another contact, and in terms of creating and specializing your learning process, the people who are involved and people who are heading our leaders in the space industry often post articles. They post conferences, and if you read those articles, then you turn to another article, and then you will learn. You will have your own customized course where your curriculum is coming from these posts. And I'm not saying it's ideal, but as you become more and more familiar with the material, you will be able to customize and make it an ideal learning tool for yourself. So follow those articles, read those articles, also see what opportunities come up, because a lot of people post internship opportunities. So you want to follow where those opportunities are. Sometimes they post for volunteers. And don't be afraid, if you want to work with an organization, to send them a message and say, I am from wherever, and I am interested in becoming more knowledgeable about space. I like what your organization does. Is there an opportunity for me to volunteer or participate or unpaid? I'm happy to help virtually, and hopefully they'll write back and tell you how you can become involved. So even if there's a no response, or response is not ideal, keep trying, and I think you will access a group or an opportunity, and you can just take it from there. It's a growing field. It's a very exciting field, and like I said, there's a lot of opportunity there. Just try to learn as much as you can, and then try to identify the area that you're most interested in, and you can apply your education, you can apply your skills that you've already developed in that space sector. You may have to develop more, but as I mentioned in my introduction, all of the work that I had done was essential for me to be able to do what I'm doing now. Nothing was lost. So I encourage you to do the same, and in your free time, just read as much as you can. If you can go to a conference, if you can watch a documentary, all of it will be helpful in creating that context of what the space industry is, what the space world is, because it is changing and it is in flux. So it's not clear, it's clearly delineated. So you can go and really find the answers that you're looking for. And if you don't find them, ask, and I'm sure someone will be very happy to help you in your search for that answer. I think it would be, and it will be, incredibly important that anyone really coming from a state, not spacefaring, to spend some time talking to friends, to family, to your teachers about the history of your culture, of what your predecessors in the area where you live, how they studied the stars, how they studied the planets, what contributions have they made, whether through metallurgy, like the metals that are used in space, glass, mathematics, from as far back as you can find, because I think that's really an essential way to really position yourself to say, my ancestors, just everyone on Earth, has studied the skies, has been interested. We've contributed in this way, and I'm going to further that contribution. So to have this background, to have this identity, and to have this pride of the people from your region, their contribution to space. It doesn't have to be from the 1960s. It could be from 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago. That's very important. I think that will help the international collaboration when everyone comes to the table and says, this is what we contributed in the past, and also for yourself, and you hear about that from your colleagues. I think that will make it a more peaceful exploration of space, and more pride in the human capacity to work together over time and culture. So that's just the last thing, and I that's really important. I think so. I just wanted to mention that before we left. But thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Marlene. It was really amazing to just listen to you and have you touch on so many things that I personally found endearing. And as you were discussing, there were some things that kept jumping at me that I hadn't thought about in a long time. And I really wish we had more time, because I find your area of practice very interesting. And I would love to have you again on the vlog just to talk about, your work in cultural objects and how attainable it is, particularly for emerging nations. But at this time, I have to say goodbye to you and to just thank you again for making time out to speak with me